Somewhere in the country of America, in an apartment building just outside New York City, down to the second floor of the building, is a 68-year-old woman called Mrs. Fidil and her cat Mint, standing on a wobbling stool trying to reach a spice jar on the top shelf. The more she stretches reaching for the jar, the more unbalanced her stool becomes, but she luckily manages to take the spice jar and step down from the unstable stool. Mrs. Fidil continues making dinner for her 8 grandkids who are to visit her. She hears a knock in the door and immediately goes to open thinking it is one of her grandchild. But when she opens the door, she finds a bold black man wearing a black robe. She tries redirecting the black man to the next floor where black people lived, but the man smiles at her menacingly, and holds the door preventing her from closing it.
You are to come with me, Mrs. Fidil.
The man says in a deep voice while looking directly at her.
You have died, Mrs. Fidil.
He says again, still looking directly at her. Thinking the man is a thief who only wants to rob her, Mrs. Fidil backs away from him, pleading with him to take anything he wants but spare her life. The man follows her inside her apartment still smiling menacingly. I wish I was but a thief, Mrs. Fidil, as I am of death. You have died, Mrs. Fidil, the man says while pointing at the floor behind her. And when Mrs. Fidil turns back, she could not believe her eyes, as she sees herself lying on the ground lifeless. It turns out, her stool had actually tripped and she had fallen to her death. The black man offers her comfort, by telling her that her family will soon find her and give her a proper burial, and she will have many grandchildren named after her for she was kind to her family. At this point, Mrs. Fidil accepts her fate, and even bends down to cover parts of her body which are exposed as she lived as a modest woman. She smiles as tears drip down her face as her journey is now over and she could see her husband again. As the kind Mrs. Fidil is very sure that her grandchildren would be thrown into mourning and would not taste her cooking, she scoops a little soup with a spoon and brings it close to the black man's mouth. And after trying it, it is perfect, the man replies while still smiling, and her face lights up on last time. She turns back to find the black man already out of the window patiently waiting for her, ready to take her to the scales of justice. So Mrs. Fidil quickly follows the man and they begin climbing the stairs leading to the heavens, until they come to the edge of a vast desert. By this time, the man's clothes are different, as his robes is now spotless white. He takes her hand and guides her to a small rug side and unveils a perfectly balanced golden scale. He places a feather in one side and removes her heart from her chest. If she is to enter into paradise, her heart must be as light as the feather and perfectly balanced with it. He places the heart on the other side and the scale begins to swing. And although she was not perfect, Mrs. Fidil had tried her best, and her best was good enough to enter paradise as her heart balances with the feather. The black man then takes her to a place with 5 doors, and Mrs. Fidil must choose only one door, as each door would take her to a different kind of paradise. She begs him to choose a door for him and the door in the middle rolls open. She walks up to the door all alone and stands to take one last look at the world of the living, but her cat Mince pushes her and she falls inside, disappearing. On the other side of the world, is a soul destined for Anubis the black man, but unlike the kind Mrs. Fidil who had lived her life kindly and full of grace, Laura Moon had a very different life, a life most would describe as tasteless and devoid of purpose. She worked as a runner in Luxor in Las Vegas casino, a job she hated and which drained her every day. Her bosses were not the kindest of people and her clients were even worse. Some tried to con her and others openly hit on her trying to sleep with her, something she did not enjoy at all, and every day after a long day at work, she would go home to her only joy in the whole world, her cat Mittens. One day after spraying and killing a fly inside her house, she holds the bug killer into her hands and starts thinking, what was the purpose of what she was doing? And why did she do it day in day out? And after a while of debating with herself, Laura Moon makes up her mind. She first removes her clothes and goes inside her jacuzzi and closes the lid, then takes one last long breath ready to end it all. She holds the bug spray in her hands and squeezes the trigger releasing the toxic gases on that small space. But Laura Moon could not do it. She kicks the lid open coughing violently and gasping for fresh air, and she very quickly returned to her old life living even more miserably. She started hooking up with random strangers to try and fill the void in her heart. At first it was her clients, then men with criminal records, and when her cat died, a grieving Laura takes it up a notch, as she starts drinking alcohol even more, and starts seducing her best friend's husband and very soon started sleeping with him. And although Laura knew this was going nowhere, she leads him on to a point that he starts thinking about leaving his wife for her. One day as the two are riding down the road, Laura bends down and opens his zipper to pleasure him one last time before she leaves him. And she does it so perfectly that Robbie loses all his focus, and by the time he sees his truck coming directly towards him, he tries braking but their car is hit crashing off the road. When Laura Moon wakes up, she is standing on an elevated ground and could not believe what she is seeing. As she was watching her lifeless body lying on the ground, her background suddenly changes and she appears in the desert. The same desert Mrs. Fidil had appeared, and behind her was the black man just standing there without saying a single word. You were alive, Laura Moon, but now you are dead, the black man says to her before walking off. They both come to the scale of justice where the man is to weigh her heart against a feather. He sits down on the rug but Laura is hesitant, still defiant even in her death, and only sits down when the man points to the ground. And after placing the feather on the scale, he reaches towards her to take her heart, but Laura pushes his hand away, as she is sure her heart is not light as a feather, as she had lived her life very badly. She pushes the scale down using her hand and unknowingly seals her own fate. Angrily, the man stands up and walks away from her, and she quickly follows him, trying to beg for a second chance. But instead, she is shown a bathtub, the same bathtub she had tried killing herself inside, and the man opens it and commands her to go inside. In life, you believed in nothing, and you will go into nothing, the man says while still pointing towards the bathtub. Laura still refuses to enter, now demanding for a second chance, but the man is not having her nonsense, as she had had a chance and wasted it drinking alcohol, having meaningless sex, and wasting all her time in things she did not enjoy, and in so doing, her fate was already sealed. Please like and subscribe for more.